Wait, how do you how are you supposed to do an intro? Uh Starting with the recurve bow. Please don't actually use this. The passive completely useless, so please don't use it. Official's bow and the compound bow, please don't use these either because the secondary side increases physical damage and Yoimiya's E skill will make you do power damage, so please don't use these bows either. They're just really bad. Sack bow, Yoimiya won't be able to proc this passive, so because on her initial cast she won't hit anything, so please don't use this. It's completely useless, but the base attack's kind of high, so I guess just also don't use it. And Favoni's bow won't increase your damage either, so please don't use this either. Moving on to C tier, I think this weapon will be okay. I don't think it'll be that great because at level 90 the base attack is pretty low, but the passive does increase your normal attack damage by 60% if you meet the requirements. So I think it will be okay, but this damage increase won't scale that hard because your base attack is very low. But this weapon also gives you crit rate, so if this is all you have, I guess, but I just don't recommend using this bow since the base attack is really low. Moving on with the Raven bow. I think this would be slightly worse than Slingshot, since at R5 you're only getting a 24% damage increase with the passive up, and having EM as a secondary stat is a lot worse compared to crit rate, so I don't recommend this weapon either. I don't recommend Messenger since most of Yoimiya's damage will come from her normal attacks during her E uptime, or her elemental skill uptime I should say, and this weapon increases your charge attack weak spot damage. The reason why this bow is not in like the please no tier is because the secondary stat is crit damage, which is really useful, and the base attack isn't like the lowest for a 3-star, but I do find this passive quite useless since Yoimiya's playstyle will most likely be like Hu Tao's, where once her elemental skill is up, you switch off. So I don't think this bow will be that great. Sharpshooter's Oath, I don't think, it's like the same thing with Messenger. I'm just gonna put it below Messenger since the base attack is lower. Prototype Crescent, I think will be better than all these 3-star options because when you switch to Yoimiya, you can actually do a charge shot first to proc the passive and then use your elemental skill. And when you proc the passive, it gives you 36% attack at R1 and it lasts for 10 seconds, and your elemental skill also lasts for 10 seconds. So I think that this bow will be okay. It's just a bow that gives you a lot of attack, but I still don't really recommend it because there's so many better options. LG the End will not be that good. I think it will be worse than Prototype Crescent because the only way to proc the passive is with your burst, since your elemental skill cannot even hit an opponent, and the only way to proc the mark on your elemental burst is with anyone other than Yoimiya. So this will only work when Yoimiya is off the field after she uses her burst, which is not that ideal because she won't get the rest of the buff ideally until after you proc her burst twice with someone else. But I do think it's better than all of these options since the base attack is pretty large. Okay, Stringless will be in low B tier because the passive does not increase your elemental skill damage, and it's not like your elemental skill does damage anyway, and it would only increase your burst damage. The elemental mastery is okay if you're doing reactions, especially with your burst, but otherwise it would only increase your burst damage and does not increase your normal attack damage whatsoever, which is what you want to focus on as Yoimiya. I think Robo will be slightly better than Stringless, Royal Bow is basically just a stat stick at this point. It gives you attack and it gives you crit rate over time as long as you don't score a crit hit, meaning you're bound to just crit more often. But that's it, it's just like a stat stick, there's nothing too special about it. Windbloom Ode, I think it's slightly worse than Royal Bow because the secondary stat it gives you is Elemental Mastery. I don't think Elemental Mastery will be that good on Yoimiya since her normal attacks most likely have an internal cooldown, so you can't proc Vaporize all the time with the normal attacks if you had like a Xingqiu support. However, it would definitely help with your burst though if you're doing reactions with your burst. The passive would only give you that 32% attack buff for 6 out of the 10 seconds your E passive is up. So I would say this is worse than the Royal Bow. I think Ally Flash will be a solid option on Yoimiya because the passive grants you more damage the longer you're off field, and generally you will be off the field for at least 8 seconds because that's what your elemental skill cooldown will be after 10 seconds of using your elemental skill. Therefore, you will get a 16% damage bonus after switching back on if you're off the field for 8 seconds. If it's longer for 8 seconds and you go up to 10 seconds, it will reach the max threshold of 20% at R1. So when you switch back in, once you use your skill, you will be doing 20% more damage for the first 4 seconds, and then you will slowly do less damage over time as your elemental skill ends, but it will still grant you lots of damage. Keep in mind, this increases the amount of damage you do rather than giving you a simple attack buff, which does not scale as hard. Blackcliff Warbow will also be a great option on Yoimiya because the base attack is high and it gives you crit damage as the secondary stat, helping you with your crit ratio, allowing you to focus on crit rate more since your weapon already gives you a good amount of crit damage. Also, in the right situation, the passive can be very good, like in Floor 9 and 10 Spiral Abyss where there is a lot of enemies that you can take down easily and you can hit the max stacks of the passive very well, giving you that attack buff. However, if you're in a less ideal situation, for example, let's say there's only one enemy, the passive will be completely useless to you since you cannot proc it whatsoever. Fearless Hunt will also be a good option on Yoimiya. This is because not only does it give you crit rate, but it groups the enemies together. Now you might say, the grouping isn't very relevant since your arrows can only hit one target at a time. Yes, that is true, but this grouping would allow you to hit more enemies with your AoE burst at the end of your elemental skill rotation. Therefore, it is a good option on Yoimiya as well. I think Protect Crescent will also be a good option at R5. I don't recommend spending all your craftables on this because there are better craftable options, but if you have an R5 one laying around, it will be a pretty good option since, you know, the way you would use this weapon on her is you would, before using your E, you would hit a weak spot to proc this passive and get this 72% attack buff for 10 seconds, which is the perfect amount of time to match your elemental skill uptime. A R5 Fearless Hunt wouldn't make that much of a difference anyway, because all you're doing is you're grouping more often and that Cyclone will do a little bit more damage over time, but that's it. Blackcliff Warbow at R5 will be a very good option. I really don't recommend buying a R5 Blackcliff Warbow. It costs so much Star Glitter and I personally don't think it's worth it, but if you have one, it's pretty freaking good, especially if you can proc the passive. Now remember, the only difference between an R5 Blackcliff and an R1 Blackcliff is that if you're able to proc the passive, it will be better. But if you aren't able to proc the passive often, it will not be better. R5 Royal Bow will actually be pretty insane. I do not recommend buying a R5 Royal Bow as well. It also costs a lot of Star Glitter, but if you have one, it's really good because every time you don't get a crit hit, your crit rate goes up by 16% and can go all the way up to 80%, and it basically just fixes your crit rate issue if you have one. So if you have one, you can use it, but I just really don't recommend buying this all the way up to R5. It's not worth it in my opinion. Amos bow will actually be slightly worse than the royal bow in my opinion, because yes, the base attack might be higher, but to get the max value out of the passive, you have to be very far away to block the passive. And Yoimiya is mainly using her normal attacks instead of charge attacks to do most of her damage. And the further away you are, the more inaccurate you become, and you will be missing a lot of your shots. And when you get closer, you will be losing out on damage, which makes it very lackluster. However, the base attack is pretty high, and it does give you a lot of attack as its secondary stat, so it's still a solid option. Ally Flash at R5 will also be a very good option on her. If the base attack is high, and the passive kind of just makes your damage like a decaying rust. It's like a rust, but it's expiring over time. So it's not as good as Rust, but it's still a very good option. Speaking of Rust, Rust is very similar to the R5 Ally Flash, except it will not have that decaying 40% damage. Also, it gives you a attack percent secondary stat, and it increases our normal attack damage by 40%, which will be 1, since we'll be mainly using her normal attacks for damage. However, if you are going to play her for her charge shots, which I don't really recommend, it will decrease your damage by 10%. So if you want to play for her charge shots, I don't really recommend this bow. However, it does increase your normal attack damage by 40%, which is huge. So very good option on Yoimiya. Skyward Harp will be another very good option on Yoimiya. Not only is the base attack very high, but also gives you crit rate. It also increases your crit damage by 20% at R1, and the passive does a pretty good amount of damage every 4 seconds. The new craftable bow will also be a good option. It increases your normal attack damage by 16% and your charge attack damage by 12%, and that becomes 32% normal attack damage and 24% charge attack damage increase when you have your burst available. Now, if your burst is not up, it will not be giving you that much of a damage increase, but when your burst is up, it is a very good option. Also keep in mind, if you will be using your charge attacks a lot with Yoimiya as well, then this would be better than the Rust for you. I will not tell you how to play Yoimiya. You should play how you want, but ideally, if you want to maximize your damage, you will not be using her charged attacks over her normal attacks during your elemental skill uptime. However, I will consider Rust slightly better anyway, since your elemental skill uptime is 10 seconds and your elemental skill downtime is 8 seconds, therefore you will be using your normal attacks more than your charge attacks. The Thundering Pulse will be Yoimiya's best in slot at R1. This is because not only does the secondary stat give you crit damage as a secondary stat, but the base attack is high and it increases your attack by 20%. You can also increase your normal attack up to 40% at 3 stacks. To get 3 stacks, all you have to do is land normal attacks, use your elemental skill, and do not have your burst up, which is all very easy to fulfill. Also keep in mind, with the new artifact set incoming, it is easier to keep your burst down if you're using this 4-piece set, because once you use your elemental skill, if you have at least 15 energy or more, you will lose 15 energy. Therefore, it is easier to keep all 3 stacks on the Thundering Pulse up. The craftable bow at R5 will be really good on her, because with your burst up, your normal attack damage will be increased by 64% and your charge attack damage will be increased by 48%, which is very good if you can meet the conditions. And even without them, 32% normal attack damage increase and 24% charge attack increase is still very good. R5 Amos would just be absolutely insane, because with just 1 stack, you're already doing 40% more damage on your normal and charged attacks. Meaning if you just have 2 stacks or more, that's already at least 56% more damage on your normal and charged attacks. Now, yes, the further you're away, you're more likely to miss your shots, but even just getting 2 or 3 stacks will increase your damage by at least 56% or more. R5 Skyward Harp will also just be absolutely ridiculous, because this thing will give you 40% more crit damage rather than 20 compared to R1. It gives you crit rate, high base attack, and every 2 seconds you are doing 125% of your attack as physical damage, which is just so much free damage from this weapon. R5 Rust is pretty self-explanatory. Like 80% more normal attack damage is just absolutely insane. That's like almost double your normal attack damage. That's just insane. And obviously, you know, the Thundering Pulse at R5, her best in slot at R1 is obviously gonna be her best in slot at R5. It's literally the weapon that's gonna be coming out with her most likely, and it's just gonna be your best in slot. Although it's gonna cost a lot of money. But yeah, that will be it for my Yoimiya's weapons bow tier list. Let me know what you guys think, if you agree or disagree in the comments, and if you like this video, please like, maybe subscribe if you feel like it, but you don't have to, but I really appreciate it. I read every comment as well,